live streamed as well as recorded via the internet, and this recording archived for future viewing. Could all participants please mute themselves when not speaking in order to avoid any background noise or feedback when other participants are speaking. If you wish to participate today, could you please raise your hand using the raise hand function? If you do raise your hand and it's not subsequently invited to speak by the chair, please could you then turn your camera on to indicate or place a message in the chat function. When invited to address by the chair, Councillor Janice Charles, please could all participants ensure that their microphone and camera is on to ensure that they can be seen and heard when actively participating. If this is not possible for any reason, please bring this to the attention of Councillor Charles or myself as your Democratic Services Officer this evening. Please ensure that all debate is raised verbally and not via the chat function for the sake of the recording. The chat function may be used to highlight any technical issues and or to grab the attention of myself or Councillor Charles. If any participant has difficulty hearing or being heard when they are addressing the committee, then please could they make that known to myself or Councillor Charles. Thank you, Chair. That concludes the housekeeping.
You're muted, Janice.
Thank you, Neil. Thank you, Amy. We should all be word perfect on that now. Welcome everybody to our Healthy Living and Social Care Scrutiny Committee, Tuesday the 7th of March 2023 at 5 p.m. Agenda item 1 is the first. Apologies for absence. Do we have any from anybody?
None to myself, Chair.
I see no hands up. Thank you very much. Moving on to agenda item 2, which are the minutes of the meeting held on the 7th of February 2023. Would you like me to do it page by page, or are you happy to move it en bloc?
Move the minutes.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Neil. Agenda item 3 is to receive declaration.
Chair, sorry, my hand is up.
Oh, I didn't see it. I'm so sorry.
It's about the minutes. Could I just can you hear me okay? Sorry,
yeah,
Chair, I haven't got my camera on. So it's page 5. It's just a minor thing and you may not want to pick it up. But it says in response to Councillor Capp's queries in relation to hygiene caddies, I won't read it out. I'm just wondering if you could agree, committee could agree, that my queries were really concerns about the cost of hygiene caddies and the outdoor trading places tax. It's, you know, it's a minor point really, but I just felt it wasn't an accurate reflection to just say that they were queries.
Okay, is everybody happy to insert that into the minutes? Thank you. And so therefore, can we approve the minutes once more? Susan and Neil? Yep. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Moving on to agenda item 3, to receive declarations of interest, including whipping declarations. Do we have any today, Susan? You're on mute, Susan.
Declaration of interest in relation to agenda item 7. It makes reference to a review of telecare. I have a number of relatives in receipt of telecare, so my declaration of interest is personal, not prejudicial, and if that's discussed, I'll stay in the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Anybody else? No? Thank you. Moving on to agenda item 4, which is the support for unpaid carers in the Vale of Glamorgan. This is a covering an annual report. We have it once a year. And Natasha, can you take us through it, please?
Yeah, hi, thanks everybody. So yeah, as Councillor Charles said, this is an annual report in relation to unpaid carers, and the report seeks to provide some overview and summary of local, regional and national work in relation to services and support for unpaid carers. You'll see at the bottom of the covering report there is a SWAY report that has a lot of detailed information. Hopefully you've all had a chance to take a look at that. Some of the key things to pick up throughout 22-23 in relation to Vale of Glamorgan is that we have we've developed a number of respite services for unpaid carers. So in relation to low-level respite services, so that was voucher schemes. We are launching at the end of March a coffee mornings for unpaid carers, and we've also been looking at supporting and improving communication around the Carers Gateway. In relation to our young carers, we now have a dedicated social care officer within our CYPS service who is looking to improve and develop our links within community services. So YMCA are predominantly the service provider for services to young carers, and they have been delivering the Young Carers ID cards on behalf of Vale of Glamorgan and Cardiff Council. Members may recall that paper was brought previously around an unpaid carers charter. The launch of that charter is happening at the end of March, and alongside that will be a delivery and implementation plan of how we'll meet the support needs and services. In relation to specific projects that have taken place this year, we facilitated the Unpaid Carers Fund on behalf of Welsh Government. This was a £500 payment that Welsh Government set the criteria of who would be entitled to that. So it was very much linked to a carers allowance entitlement, but we, I think in the region of, I'm sure it was about 1,300 or just under, delivered payments, £500 payments to those carers in the Vale. We've got regional programmes that continue to run, and that's the Young Carers in School programmes. And in relation to our carers team within the Vale, there's been some recent changes in relation to having a dedicated team manager within that service who will be supporting the team to look at ongoing developments throughout 23-24. I'm not sure if I can take questions at this point or if anyone would like any further information.
Does anybody like to ask any questions? Susan?
Thank you, Natasha. Really helpful to run through the key issues in the report. If I may, I have a question in relation to the £500 support payment for unpaid carers. So I note that the report says that 1,949 applications were received, 1,233 of those applications were successful. So about 37% of the applications received were not eligible for that grant. And just wondering what the main reason for that was.
Yeah. So we had a number, and I've had a look. We had a look at some of the data around this. We had a number that were duplicate applications. So some people put applications in 8 times. So there was a number that contributed to that. And I think that could have been in some ways the application process. It was an online process, although you could contact a carer support officer who would help you to go through that. The other predominant feature was that the individual weren't receiving the correct carers allowance. So it was very specific, the criteria from Welsh Government, and it was a carers allowance that was separate from a carers allowance element within universal credit. And there was no change in that. You had to receive, and it had to read that way through DWP records. So other than, duplicate applications and not receiving the correct carers allowance element, that they were the predominant reasons. Some may have been they didn't live in our area, so they had to go to the local authority area, but they were only on a handful of cases.
Thank you. If I may comment on that, Chair. Thank you. Really interesting to understand that. I don't know if you're aware that Welsh Government is doing some work around developing a charter for Welsh benefits. And one of the reasons for that is because there's very clear evidence that it can be really complicated for people to understand and access their entitlement to support. And obviously it's particularly critical for unpaid carers who are often under a considerable degree of financial and emotional pressure. So I'm really interested to understand whether there's more that we can be doing as a council to make it as easy as possible for people to understand and access their entitlements to support. I'm not expecting you to have a solution to that, but it is something that I think would be helpful for us to consider in terms of the ongoing work of this committee, which to an extent is focused very much on our more vulnerable residents. So that is something that I think it would be useful for us to pick up for future consideration. So thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Neil?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Natasha, for the report. It's quite encouraging reading that the progress is being made. This committee is long. I mean, I've been on this committee now for some years, and we've long been supportive of the unpaid carers, because they do relieve the council of quite a huge financial burden that we would otherwise have to cover. And after our deliberations last night, and you know, the holes that we've got in the money that we've got coming in order to cover our budget, they do take an awful lot of pressure off us. And I think the £500 money allowances to unpaid carers is their due. It is something that we need to be supporting. They do need some relief. They do need the support and respite and all the rest of it that we can put in with through various other means. I've got a couple of questions in relation to the young carers, both in terms of identifying the benefits for the young carers. The ID cards give them access to. I understand that the YMCA are lead on that, but what kind of benefits? Part of the problem with I think with young carers, the ones at school, is, and I've said this before in previous meetings, is that they don't necessarily self-identify, and there's a certain reluctance or just a certain amount of, oh, does that apply to me? Kind of lack of awareness. Yeah, yes, you are a carer. Please, you can have these things. But you need to be able to come and tell us that you are. So where are we, or where, you know, what are the, I mean, the benefits that they would get with the ID cards would hopefully attract more kids to come forward and say, look, I'm in this position too, can you help me? And the other question I have is, we're talking about this young carers at school, and the numbers of schools that are involved. There's only 2 primary, and nearly all the secondary are involved. I understand there's still one that's recalcitrant, and I'm just wondering whether we can have a further update on that, please.
Okay. I'll take the first bit. So the Young Carers ID card. So this was a Welsh Government funded project, and so the initial work around this project did focus quite a lot on the administration and the ability to provide it for those young carers that were being identified. So a lot of the first stages of that focused on that. It's moved into a different phase because Welsh Government are no longer funding, but as a region, so that's Vale and Cardiff, we've given our undertaking that we will continue to fund that. However, we want to have a lens of looking at added value for the young carer. So exactly what you're talking about. Currently, they have access to pharmacy, so they're allowed to collect medication. It is those kind of things they can show in schools if there are particular issues in relation to registration. They're in conversation around reduced transport on bus travel, and that's further work's being done with Transport for Wales, or I can't remember the rail network. So there are some lower level benefits other than identification at the moment, but I do think it's an area where the whole point of this is to bring value for a young carer and some benefit, not just to say I've got a card, I'm identified as a young carer. So there are benefits now, so there are some discounts in shops, but there needs to be some further momentum around that over the next 12 months, because that's what this phase of the project will be. The second part of your question in relation to schools, so each school has a Young Carers Champion identified. So along with the other project, the Young Carers in Schools project, that's a very dedicated piece of work that's happened through the Vulnerable Learners Group with Martine in those schools in the Vale. We've recently extended the focus to primary schools. So that's why I think you might see less primary schools, but with an acknowledgement that actually there are a significant number of children within primary schools who are young carers. So that is growing, that awareness is growing, the need to offer support and identification is growing. And I think probably the two that you've mentioned are the specific, we're working towards an accreditation, but all of the primary schools do also have Young Carers Champions within the primary schools.
Yeah. Thank you. The benefits, the engagement with local businesses, and is there engagement with the leisure centres as well in terms of the kids can actually flash the card and perhaps get in for free?
Yes, alongside some of the already, there's already some benefits, isn't there, in relation to accessing free swim and things like that. But there are some in relation to access of gym. We're looking at introducing that through this year, so that's been in conversation, and that's the next phase that we're looking at.
I'd certainly encourage that to move forward. If if we can do it as a committee, can do anything to help to publicise it and to negotiate it, then please come back to us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Natasha. I used to be a carer myself, and I'm absolutely thrilled with what you're doing and how fast it seems to be progressing these days. And please send our thanks as a committee as to everything that everybody else is doing. Thank you. Which takes us on to agenda item 5 and 6, which is the revenue monitoring for the period of 1st of April to the 31st of January 2023, and the capital monitoring for the period 1st of April to the 31st of January 2023. I realise that this is quite a bulky report and an awful lot of reading within it, because most of it does not apply to this particular committee. So on that note, is Gemma here?
Hi, good evening.
Oh, hi, Gemma.
Hello,
yeah.
hi.
So Gemma,
sorry, Chair, if I could, sorry, just to interrupt, but with regards to the last item, can I just confirm that the committee are happy to move the recommendations as per the report?
Sorry. Yeah, I'm sure they are. There are 4 recommendations. The first one is that Scrutiny Committee considers the annual report on support for unpaid carers and work undertaken to support unpaid carers in the Vale of Glamorgan. 2 is that as a committee consider the duties of the council and its partners in regard of delivering services for unpaid carers within the Social Services and Wellbeing Wales Act 2014. And 3, that Scrutiny Committee considers how the council and its partners are meeting the ministerial priorities for unpaid carers and the regional work of the Cardiff and Vale of Glamorgan Unpaid Carers Board. And 4, the Scrutiny report receives a report on support for unpaid carers in the Vale of Glamorgan on an annual basis. So are you all happy to move those recommendations en bloc, all 4? Thank you, Neil. Anybody else?
Chair, my hand is raised.
Thank you, Susan.
Just in terms of the recommendation, it asks us to consider, whether or not the council is, I apologise, dry throat. Just in terms of one of the recommendations, which is asking us to
Susan?
I think it was recommendation 3, Chair, about whether or not the council is meeting all of its obligations. Just further to my previous point, really, how can we pick up that important issue of making sure that the council is doing all that it can to make it as easy as possible for unpaid carers to access the support that's available to them? How do we take that forward?
Well, we can call for another meeting and another report to see if it is moving on.
Yeah, then that would be my suggestion. I think it links to a later committee that's coming, a later report that's coming before the committee that also makes reference to a new digital strategy. So I don't think it's necessarily an issue that can be dealt with in isolation, but I think it's important it's an issue that's not lost.
Okay, so can we bring a report?
Can I suggest, Chair?
Hang on a minute, Neil. Hang on. Can we bring a report back to the committee as soon as possible, as soon as you've got time to do it, with just regard to that one agenda item, the recommendation that Scrutiny Committee considers how the Council and its partners are meeting the ministerial priorities for unpaid carers and the regional work of the Cardiff and Vale of Glamorgan Unpaid Carers Board, with reference to access for
point of order,
easy
Chair.
access.
We could possibly add to the recommendation here with a slight amendment to support Councillor Lloyd Selby's intention of prioritising our efforts to engage with the ministerial priorities for unpaid carers. If we add that, when it goes back to, it's going to go back to cabinet, and that would draw cabinet's attention to that, and we wouldn't need to rediscuss it soon. If that's okay with the rest of the committee.
Well, thank you, Neil. Can we bring in Amy first, please?
Thank you, Chair. No, I need to obviously clarify with the committee with regards to the recommendations. So originally, before Councillor Thomas's last comments, you do already have a recommendation to bring a report annually, which would be around March 24. However, if you wanted to track progress, I was going to ask officers whether or not it would be beneficial to shorten that time frame and maybe bring a report much sooner than that. But if that's not satisfactory for the committee, going to Councillor Thomas's point, I just want to clarify the main crux of your point, please, Councillor Thomas, with regards to referring to cabinet. Are you asking for this report to be referred to cabinet, or?
Yeah, I mean, we can ask for this report to be referred to cabinet, but we can also include a sentence to the recommendations supporting Susan Lucelby's points. I don't know if she'd like to phrase it, then perhaps we could we could then agree it.
Susan, it's your concern. What would you like to do?
Can I just clarify, are we being asked to report back to cabinet in relation to these recommendations? Can I clarify that point, please?
No, you're not. No.
Thank you. In that case, I would
We can do it though. We can do that though. We can sort of refer it to cabinet as well.
Can I ask the
go ahead,
Democratic Services Officer to confirm that? Are we able to refer the report back to cabinet?
You are able to refer, but obviously your recommendation has to have purpose in terms of what cabinet are being asked to do with that information. So this report has been written specifically for your committee, and therefore it's been brought to you, and therefore your recommendations are written for your consideration. And also obviously bearing in mind that your cabinet member would have also already had this information in terms of their dealing with the service. So if you feel that it's necessary to refer that on for information, then you are entitled to do so. However, you'd need to be clear for cabinet's sake what the purpose of that was. So going back to my original suggestion, in that it might be more beneficial for you as a committee to have a further update much sooner than an annual, which would then be able to, officers would be able to pick up specifically on the points that Councillor Lloyd Selby was making, which is about how we're meeting the obligations to make it as accessible as possible.
I mean, the reason for the recommendation, one of the reasons is to ensure that members continue to exercise effective oversight of this important function on an annual basis. But Sue, would you be happy to bring it back sooner?
I'm conscious that Councillor Edward Williams has his hand up. Can we hear from him first, please? And then I'll respond to that. Thank you.
Eddie?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Scrutiny Committee. I'm listening, obviously, with interest because it's important that you're quite rightly picking up points on a report. I am conscious that we don't want to. This report is an annual report, but there's no reason why we can't have an update. I would just ask that. I'd just like to emphasise that this is on the national agenda. It's on the regional and also on the council agenda. So it is a key priority that we're working with, but quite rightly so. The Scrutiny Committee would probably like an update, and I would rather that would happened rather than a full report to that basis. Maybe one of the officers could send an update, or we could bring it back to a further meeting. Choice is yours, but I would ask the committee not to ask for a further report, which takes up considerable officers' time in the circumstances that we're dealing with at the moment. Thank you.
Well, so where does that leave us exactly? Susan?
Yeah, thank you for those comments. I think they're really helpful. I agree that it wouldn't be a good use of officers' time to ask for a report to come back more quickly. I also think in relation to the recommendations 2 and 3 before us, they're actually cross-cutting issues. This is broader than those matters that are of primary focus for this committee. And so in that sense, I think it's just a question of whether or not Cabinet consider there is any further action that the Council can take to ensure that it's fully meeting its duties in relation to unpaid carers. And I don't think we're looking for a report in relation to that. I think it's a response to this helpful report that's coming to us, asking committees simply to consider whether there's further action that can be taken. And as I say, I would expect that to be a cross-cutting issue.
Well, the reasons for the recommendation are to ensure that members continue to exercise effective oversight of this important function undertaken by the Social Services Directorate, that scrutiny members are aware of the duties outlined within the legislation, and that scrutiny members are informed of the ministerial priorities set for carers and the regional work taking place for unpaid carers, and facilitate support for the lead member of carers, and the fourth, which I mentioned just now. I'm sure that if Eddie could come along to one of the meetings and just give us a very quick verbal update on where we are with these, I would be happy with that. Would you be happy with that, Susan and Eddie? Neil? You're on mute, Eddie.
Yeah, more than happy. I think basically what we're saying here, we're having the annual report, which is giving us an update to where we are now, and quite rightly so. We want to see a further update in as it progresses through. I can reassure you, it is a priority, and it is meeting both the local both the councils, regional and the national initiatives. So there will be progress on this, and no doubt we'll be publicising that in the coming months.
Okay, so Susan, are you happy with that so that we can continue to move the recommendations that we've got? Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. That's
okay
very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, Chair. So just to clarify, we're moving with the recommendations as per the report, but I will put a note on the committee's action sheet that we'll invite Councillor Williams back at an appropriate point to provide a further update.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Eddie.
Excuse me, Chair. I'm more than happy for the officers to do that as well, because they'll have the better detail, and you can see that the officers are actually smiling at me because that's what I generally do. But basically,
we'd love
thank
you to do it, Eddie.
Yeah.
We love your dulcet tones.
Keep me on my toes. Thank you.
Okay, moving on to 5 and 6. That was Gemma to
Hi,
take
good evening,
us
Chair.
through.
Hi.
Yeah.
Hi. So in terms of this is the revenue monitoring position to January, and I'm very conscious we brought a monitoring report to the last committee as well. And I suppose in terms of the overall position for the council in terms of inflationary pressures, notably the additional pay award, and the ongoing impact of COVID and the cost of living crisis on services, that very much remains an ongoing picture. In terms of the social services specific position, that's again very similar to the last monitoring. So as we noted in the last monitoring, we had a £2 million accounting adjustment for income that's distorting the out-term position slightly in year. We also have ongoing pressures that are being reported in adult services in respect of and resource management and safeguarding in respect to community care finance, and that overspend is understated due to that ongoing inability to commission care. And we also have specific pressures within residential homes. In terms of children's services, we have ongoing pressures with regard to legal costs, support for special guardianship and residence orders, and external placements, although that has been offset slightly in year by some additional grant that we've received from the Regional Integration Fund, and it also has been offset by some underspends against fostering placements. With regard to leisure services, we do have an overspend that we've reported throughout the year, and this is due to additional support that was provided to the leisure partner off the back of reduced customer numbers following COVID. And this overspend £650,000 and will be funded from neighbourhood services reserves. We do have a reserves reconciliation within the report, and that use of reserves has reduced, and that's in part due to slippage on the capital programme. But we also are now reflecting that reallocation of reserves that we've made as part of the revenue budget for 23-24. In terms of treasury management, we're continuing to utilise reserves over external borrowing, given the relatively high interest rates that are being charged for borrowing. But off the back of that, we're continuing to generate additional income from investments, and that's going some way to offsetting some of the pressures within the revenue budget in year. Happy to take any questions on the report.
Thank you. These are rolling mandatory reports. I could see no dramatic change from the last one. I see no major changes. Parkwork changed from 500 to 650,000. Does anybody have any questions? No, I can't see any hands. The recommendations is that on agenda item 5 is that the position with regard to the authority's 22-23 revenue budget be noted, and that members note the arrangements to offset the projected overspends in 22-23 as set out in the report. Are we happy to move that? Anybody?
Move the recommendations.
Thank you, Susan. Neil? Yep, thank you. And agenda item 6.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah.
So this is the capital position to the end of January. As we've reported throughout the year, very challenging set of circumstances to deliver capital schemes in terms of inflationary costs, a shortage of skilled staff, long lead times on materials, and they're all contributing to the complexity of schemes and causing delay in delivery. There are some small elements of slippage that are relevant to this scrutiny committee. So there's a slippage of 12,000 on Carter of Porthkerry, and within the leisure remit, there's 35,000 on St Athan Outdoor Fitness, 60,000 on the Grange Community Hub, and 90,000 on the Courterville Mugger scheme. There are 2 environments that are being requested under delegated authority. So a environment of 23,000 to the Rondell House Day Services electrical upgrade, and this is because the scope of those works are far more significant than originally envisaged. So will now be a full rewire, and 71,000 to the Grange Park Community Hub scheme, and this is Section 106 funding to provide bulb and tree planting and new outdoor fitness equipment. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any questions? No, the recommendations are, oh yes, Neil.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to know whether the 2 residential units that we're in the process of establishing, whether they're appearing in this, I couldn't see them, but I'm assuming they're part of the 2 small group homes or whatever we're titling them, Rachel's babies. I see you have joined us. Whether they're part of this or whether that's coming in the next tranche.
Gemma,
Sorry,
they
Rachel, you
are,
happy to take that? Yeah.
yeah,
Thank you.
they obviously are part of the priorities for children's services, and they are linked to a saving in relation to obviously the cost that we spend on externally commissioned care. In terms of, to answer your question about when they will land, we've got a very slight delay, but we've got a June and July projected launch now for those 2 homes respectively, which isn't a million miles away, is it? And is a pleasing update for us. So that's the 4-bedded provision for younger children and the 2-bedded provision for older young people.
Are we going to get a chance to have a look at these places when?
Be nice, wouldn't it? I mean, I think
Wouldn't
it's
it?
always getting the balance, isn't it, Councillor? With these will be children's homes, but I think we could nicely build that in, couldn't we? Perhaps before they occupy, just so you can see the arrangements that have been made and the inside as well as the outside. And I can, should we take that as a request from Scrutiny, and I'll take that away.
Yes, I'd love to see them. It fits my past.
Yes, of course. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. Moving on to the recommendations then for that report, that the progress made by delivering on 22-23 capital programme within the remit of the committee be noted. 2, that the use of delegated authority within the remit of the committee as set out in the report is noted. And 3, that the use of emergency powers within the remit of the committee as detailed in the attached Appendix 1 to the report be noted. And that the changes to 22-23 and future years capital programme within the remit of the committee as set out in the report be noted. Is everybody happy with that? Yeah.
Move the recommendations.
Thank you, Councillor Lloyd-Selby.
Thank you. Seconded by Councillor Ball.
Thank you very much. Moving on to agenda item 7, which is the service level activities and performance targets to deliver the Vale of Glamorgan Council's annual delivery plan 2023 to 2024. There are 2 performance reports here. Lance is going to take them one at a time. They're rolling on quarterly reports. They are familiar to us. I think Lance will give us a brief introduction to them and then move on to questions before we move on to number 8. Is that okay, Lance?
Yes, of course. I'll be very, very brief. The first report here, the one about service level activities and performance targets is how we're going to deliver the council's annual delivery plan, and what committee have in front of them here is the activities that directorates and departments allied to the remit of this committee are going to deliver upon, and they're found at Appendix A. Appendix B is how we will measure that, essentially. And so I think probably rather than me talk through more detail, it probably makes sense for me to see if members have any questions specifically probably about those activities or measures.
I'm sure we've all read the report. So does anybody have any questions about the report? I can't see any hands up. So the recommendations are that the progress made on delivering the 22-23 capital programme within the remit of the committee, we note it, and that the use of delegated authority within the remit of the committee as set out in the report be noted, and that the use of emergency powers within the remit of the committee as detailed in the attached Appendix 1 to the report be noted. Yeah.
Chair. Sorry, I think you may be reading the recommendations for agenda item 6, but also
I am.
But Councillor Lloyd-Selby has a hand up.
Oh, well done, Susan. Thank you. I just wanted to get the report
Do you need time to get to the report, Councillor?
Yeah, I do. I'm flicking through papers like mad here. Yes, thank you. Thank you, Amy. Susan.
I've got a couple of questions, if that's okay. Appendix A sets out a commitment to adopt a new digital strategy to ensure more responsive online services. And this partly relates to the point I was making earlier about the accessibility of support for unpaid carers. So my question about that digital strategy is, will that include user testing to ensure improved accessibility, particularly for older people, unpaid carers and people with a disability?
My assumption is that it would certainly need to, from my perspective. I think, yeah, this is something that we've queried with my colleague Tom Bowring, who is looking into those issues, and he hasn't yet been able to respond to all of them, and that being one of them. My assumption is that is what will happen, and certainly that's something that we would support. He has advised that he's happy to respond to you on email with any queries that I'm not able to deal with tonight in his area.
Thank you. And just to clarify, that Tom has confirmed that there will be user testing. So in terms of this committee's response to the report and to the recommendations within the report, I think I would just want to highlight that we welcome the commitment to ensuring user testing, and we would want to ensure that that included older people, people with a disability, and unpaid carers. So that would be my recommendation, that the committee gives that feedback. And then I also have some questions in relation to Appendix B, but I'll hold back on those in case any councillors have any questions in relation to this part of the report.
I can't see any more hands up, Sue, so go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. A couple of queries in relation to Appendix B. So one relates to, forgive me, I've only got the report references here. So hopefully we can find our way through these. So reference PAM/028 reports on the percentage of assessments that have been completed for children within statutory timescales. And if I'm understanding the report correctly, it says the target in 22-23 was 85%. The target for 23-24 is 80%. And I think last year there were clearly considerable pressures, and there were some reporting periods where we were not able to achieve that target. So it's just to understand in terms of this year's target. It may not be a fair question, but how confident are you that we'll be able to achieve that? What are the factors and pressures that you're concerned about in the department that this committee might need to be mindful of? Thank you.
Thanks.
I mean, whenever we set targets, I'll talk globally if you like, and I'll get Rachel to talk in a bit more detail. But whenever we set targets, we look at our previous performance, at how well we've done already. We try and predict, I suppose, volumes going forward, and then we also compare ourselves with any national data. And I suppose our target tends to be somewhere in the middle of that, so that it's a stretch for us. It's something that we're trying to do to improve, yet also should be realistic, I suppose, in those circumstances. So sometimes we might find that we're doing much better than things are than the rest of Wales, in which case our target is likely to be less stretching, if you like, or difficult to achieve, because we would recognise that we're already performing really well. But I think to get into the specifics of it, I'll ask Rachel to come in, if that's okay.
Sure.
Thank you both. I mean, we've had exactly the conversation that you're generating, Councillor, with your questions, and we do exactly what Lance describes, really, in looking at the performance across Wales, looking at our own performance, looking at where the performance should be, if that statutory activity is operating as it should be, and also to consider the aspirational need to strive for that target. So it's a really, really difficult one, isn't it? Because if you also we won't hit that target. We won't achieve that target. It will be an incremental increase. But if I reduce that target, yeah, what am I saying in relation to the importance of the timeliness of assessments at the front door? So it isn't intended to be something that we suggest is easy. So we bring, but I also have some worries about bringing the target down to something that we can meet when our performance is clearly not where it needs to be. In terms of the pressures, we've had that conversation at a previous committee just in the last 2 or 3 meetings that I can remember. It was Councillor Thomas who generated those questions at that time. There are challenges for children's services at the front door. So the demand and complexity for us is challenging. So whether it's what comes in on a daily basis or what is already in the system. And we are undertaking at the moment, we've had quite a significant change in personnel, in key personnel. We have an improvement agenda which is rapidly evolving in terms of the expectations and the steps we will take to get from where we are to where we need to be. We recognise that it's really important to get that part of the business right, because it was what informs everything else that goes after it. But the question about the target is, do you bring the target down to something that you can meet, or do you leave the target where the performance should be? And that is a debate for us, and it's stark, isn't it, within that particular indicator.
Yeah. Susan?
Thank you. I'm anxious to leave space for any of the councillors who have questions. Rachel, thank you for that very frank and helpful response. And clearly, this particular issue is one that we'll continue to receive updates on. And you talked about the pressure that Children's Services is facing. We've had a number of conversations about that within this committee, and we welcome those frank conversations, and we'll continue to have them, no doubt, as the year continues. Can I raise a separate issue, Chair? Thank you. So again, within Appendix B, reference CPM stroke 63, it talks about proposed deletion of capturing information about the number of sports clubs which offer inclusive or specific disability opportunities. And I think that the rationale for that is that there's no longer an officer in post to be able to collate that. So obviously we would want to ensure that those opportunities are available for people in the Vale who have a disability. So I'm just wondering whether or not that information has been captured anywhere else, or whether we're doing anything to specify provision through the current contracting framework. Just interested to know how we're ensuring that people with a disability in the Vale are able to access sufficient opportunities.
Is there anybody here able to answer that question? Lance?
I will have a try. I asked Miles in advance of this because obviously Dave Levitt's unfortunately unable to make the meetings currently, and he did advise that from April 23, Disability Sport Wales will stop funding that role nationally and will instead put in place regional officers. And our officer left last year and was not replaced, as we knew the funding wasn't going to continue. However, I suppose as part of the transition for moving to a regional officer, Disability Sport Wales stopped requesting that information from local authorities. They're collecting some information themselves, but Miles says he can't guarantee the level of information or whether it will always be available to us. And I suppose that he's also added that when reporting against that KPI, we're very much reliant on information being provided from clubs, which is not always received back. Miles has said that in future, to ensure progress around inclusivity and disability sport is detailed within the current actions around the local authority partnership agreements with the Sports Council of Wales, sports development progress, and the data is reported quarterly as part of the performance management arrangements. So probably not an exact answer to your question, but hopefully provide you with some information. If you would like me to follow anything up with Miles, I'm happy to.
Are you happy with the response, Susan?
Yes, thank you, Lance. It would be helpful just to have a summary of that information. When there's a chance, I'm happy to email Miles direct to get that, so we can just give some further consideration to the issue. But thank you, that's very helpful for today.
Thank you, Susan, for your questions. Neil?
Yeah, I was going to ask around the same subject in terms of the deletion of the post, and I mean I am concerned, as is Susan, about the whether we are fully capturing the need or the provision that is there, and encouraging sports clubs and so forth to look at their equality policies and encourage them to make their facilities more accessible and encourage use by those with disabilities, for example. And I mean, I understand the need for the deletion of the post, but I'm wondering whether the encouragement is going to be forthcoming through other means.
I think the same answer will probably apply as applied to Susan with regard to having to find out the information and get back to you, or if you could email Miles directly, as he is having to take it all over at the moment while an operation goes ahead. Susan, did you want to come back in?
Yes, thank you. I absolutely appreciate the pressures and the capacity issues at the moment. And I suppose I'm just wondering, I'm conscious that this committee receives a regular report. I think it's an annual report from Legacy Leisure. Some of us visited, I was at Barry Leisure Centre. I wasn't able to get to Penarth, unfortunately, because of another issue. But that might be one way that we can get some information, certainly from a main leisure provider in the Vale, in terms of the provision that they're providing for people with a disability. I'm sure they are. And I can't remember whether or not that was included in the report that we received from them. But that might be something for us to look at as one means of at least capturing some information about provision.
Thank you, Susan. Suzanne Clifton?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to add, I can't answer the specific question in relation to Legacy Leisure, but certainly to give committee reassurance about the knowledge that we have in terms of signposting individuals who do have a disability to services that are available. So within adult social services, we do have support planners that we've been able to map what is on offer and try to match then the opportunities with individuals that we support. So I know that's not the entire context of the question, but I wanted to just offer that as an element of reassurance that certainly from an adults division and those that we support, that we do make those links, and that we are aware, those that we support, of those opportunities, and encourage obviously an active and a healthy lifestyle, regardless of what strengths an individual has, and how we ensure that they maintain their independence.
Thank you, Suzanne. Can I bring in Marianne Cope, please? Councillor Marianne Cope.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. I lost the sound for a minute, so I don't know if I missed anything, but you are all aware of the exercise referral scheme in the Vale, which is a really great scheme, and not just for people with, long-term disabilities, but obviously people with short-term disabilities. But I know they do cater for people, and that's been a really successful scheme which isn't available in other areas.
Thank you, Marianne. Yeah, I think that most of us were aware of that, but thank you very much for bringing it up, because there might be some that don't. And does anybody else have anything else they'd like to ask? Marianne, have you got a further question? No, your hand's
It's
come
a
down
legacy
now.
hand. I've taken it
Thank,
down.
thank you. So that will take us on to the recommendations, which are that members review and endorse via recommendations to Cabinet the planned service activities for 23-24 as contained in the service plan as they relate to the remit of the committee, which was Appendix A, and that members review and endorse via recommendations to Cabinet the proposed measures and service performance targets for 2023-24 relating to the remit of this committee. So is everybody happy to endorse that? Oh, Amy?
If I may, Chair, just for clarification, I don't believe the committee have raised any formal recommendations for Cabinet. So your recommendations as they stand at the moment are to note and endorse for both recommendations. Are the committees happy with that?
Recommendations 1 and 2. Do we have a proposer and a seconder? Nobody? No, nobody want. Neil, thank you, and I'll second. Thank you, Amy.
Thank you, Chair.
Did you want to come back in?
No,
Amy?
thank you, Chair. Sorry, busy scribbling.
Thank you. Which takes us on to agenda item 8, which is the annual delivery plan monitoring report, Q3 performance 22-23, and progress against external regulatory recommendations and improvements and proposals for improvements. I think Lance has a few slides to show us what is actually being done and what we have achieved as a council, and then I think he'll take questions.
Okay, I'm not sure I can share my screen. Am I allowed to do that? Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, I'm hoping that you can see that. Does that
yes,
come up?
that's on the screen.
Okay, so this report you'll be familiar with because we've had it in previous quarters, but I suppose the bit of the report that I think is quite succinct and probably just does a good overall update of our actions in relation to the service plan is here and where they fit under the council's objectives. So I'm not going to read it out because it will take some time, but I think what you see there is a good selection of progress that we've made in that period, some of which I think you will already be aware of. So things like the false response service for telecare we've discussed fairly recently, and I'm sure you're aware of the Santa's cause distributing gifts, which I appreciate now it's in March. It probably feels a bit old, but I think it's worth recognising the work that's happened. So I'm pleased that we're continuing to make progress. I think if I just quickly go down then for the areas of future focus and improvement. Again, I'm not going to read all of those out. It does talk about our continued challenges with demand. Those things haven't gone away. We have had some improvement in terms of domiciliary care very recently. I don't know whether that's sustained, and so the situation has eased a little, but there are lots of challenges, and I think we're setting out here our attempts to move them forward. So I think that was it. I didn't want to labour it, so but I just thought it was helpful to show those two slides in particular because they contain a lot of information. The rest of the report does describe where we're at exactly in terms of red, amber, greens, and so on, and some commentary with respect to individual service plan actions as well.
Thank you, Lance. Yes, it was good to receive this report. Does anybody have any questions for Lance? Councillor Christine Cave. Thank you, Christine.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I just wanted to ask a question. Obviously, it's quite a lengthy report, and I don't know whether I can guide you around the where I am. I'm on page 26, and I understand we've been developing the dementia-friendly communities, and we actually did a listening project in November through to January. I just wondered if you could give us any feedback on that.
I'm not able to, I'm afraid, but I don't know whether my colleague Suzanne will be able to. So I can see she put her hand up, so I'll hand straight to her.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I'm not able to add anything further than what's there, in the sense that it is a piece of work that is being led through the RPB. We do have that's where the feedback has gone, so that's why I'm not familiar to be able to give you the facts this afternoon. But certainly, we know that we want to develop that further, and so the outcomes would be reported at future committee in terms of the actions taken as a consequence of that that listening exercise that was undertaken, as you rightly said. And we want to do more of that. And just to also reassure committee members that we have also recently appointed November a dementia lead that has replaced a previous individual. So that's also the person trying to get to grips with what we have and how we can do that even more work in this area. So my apologies, I'm not able to give you the detail, but certainly to give you the reassurance that that is happening.
Oh, thank you for that. I do wonder, is it, it might not be at this very moment, but sometime in the next week or so, is it possible to have some understanding of when we might receive that results of that exercise?
Of course, one of the actions that I'm happy to take away, if committee are happy for me to do so, is to liaise with the dementia lead as part of the RPB to give that feedback. And that is ordinarily where you would hear some of the feedback is in the annual report from the RPB that has previously been given from Casterman. I believe it was around the January time, but certainly I realise that you want that in a much more timely fashion, Councillor Cave.
I think so, because often, although some things will stay consistent, other things will change. And so that, the quicker we are made aware, I think the better off we are in this case. Thank you.
Thank you, Christine. Thank you, Councillor Cave. Does anybody else have any questions for Lance? No, I can't see any hands. The recommendations on agenda item 8 are that members consider performance results and progress towards achieving the annual delivery plan 22-23 commitments as aligned to our corporate plan wellbeing objectives within the remit of the committee. 2, that members consider the remedial action to be taken to address areas of underperformance and to tackle the key challenges identified within the remit of the committee, with their views and recommendations referred thereafter to Cabinet for their consideration and approval. That members review the progress made to date in addressing the recommendations and improvement proposals made by our external regulators, and upon review to recommend to the Governance and Audit Committee and thereafter to Cabinet the removal of completed actions from the Insight Tracker as relevant to the remit of the Scrutiny Committee. Amy?
If I may, Chair, just following on from that, just to confirm that for recommendation 2, the committee haven't raised any formal recommendations that would be referred thereafter to Cabinet.
No.
I believe that's correct. And then with regards to recommendation 3, the committee also hasn't requested any actions from the Insight Tracker to be removed. So therefore, there again isn't anything being formally referred on to the Governance and Audit and thereafter to Cabinet. So the committee this evening for all 3 recommendations are noting the content as stated in the recommendations.
Yep, I haven't seen any of the hands up with anything else on it. So yes, that is correct, Amy. Thank you. So are we all happy to approve the recommendations? And
move
second,
the recommendations.
And Neil second. Thank you very much. Well, I don't have any items which are urgent. So thank you all very much indeed for your company today and for the reports that have been put before us. Please pass on our regards to Dave Nevitt and for a speedy recovery after his operation. And enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you all very much. If you do have anything you would like to see on the reports, please get in touch with me and we'll make sure that they go on. Thank you. Thank you all very much. Good night.
Good night
Thank
now.
you, Chair. Good night.
Good night all.
Good night all.